Women's empowerment, women leading. This is a podcast for women by women, asking the question, are women leading? Join me for the conversation at Tari, proudly brought to you by Gender and Media Connect, a place where we talk about women's issues and you have your voice and say. Hi guys, welcome again to another episode of the podcast, Are Women Leading? A podcast for women by women. My name is Tari, and in this show, we're talking about female leadership, education, and poverty, how those three things are connected. And joining me in conversation in studio is Dr. Tinashe Goronga. Remember to follow us at GMC at Tari. This conversation is proudly brought to you by Gender and Media Connect, Women's Coalition of Zimbabwe Research and Advocacy Unit, as well as this Embassy of Sweden in Harare. Dr. Goronga, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Tari.
I am well. Looking forward to having this discussion with you on women, poverty, and leadership. So many things that affect us differently. There has been research that has been done that has indicated poverty really affects genders quite differently. So you're a medical doctor.
Yes.
In our country, there are more male doctors than there are female doctors. When one looks at that, you'd initially think perhaps it's because men are awarded more opportunities, or maybe not. I'm not quite sure. Would you have an explanation for that balance or state of affairs?
Yeah, I think it comes from the issues of opportunities is very important. Like in the past, a lot of people would think that men are more intelligent than women. Men do better in mathematics and chemistry than women. But when you look at high school, I always look at primary school. When I was in primary school, we had very competitive young girls that we learned with, who sometimes performed better than me in a lot of the subjects that we did. Then high school, again, early high school, you see the same. Then along the way, some transition will start happening. So by the time you get to A level, you start seeing there are now more males in the sciences class.
Yeah.
And women are more in the arts classes and other places. So I think it's multiple factors. Like first and foremost, it's an issue of opportunities that you have to have access to education. We have to understand that maybe particularly in the past, a lot of families used to invest in the male child in terms of education. They prioritize, they make sure that he goes to the best school, he goes to boarding school. That was the priority most of the time. Then before going to school, we have, like in the environment, you'd find that the distribution of duties at home, a boy would go to school, then come back and probably do the gardening. But with women, maybe she would be expected to clean the house before she goes to school, and already when she's at school, she's tired. Then even the role models and the upbringing, because as a boy, I grew up seeing a lot of successful men. Like I used to see most of the presidents that I saw were male, most of the people in the boardrooms were male, most of the doctors I saw were male. So I didn't dream about becoming a nurse, or because the thing is, I saw nurses being a predominantly female industry. I dreamt about being a doctor because I felt that's where I belonged as a man, because I was seeing a lot of men. So imagine with women, probably for a lot of them, because they were seeing nurses, they would think that maybe that's where they were meant to be, because you're not seeing many people who look like them in those spaces. So already what you're exposed to, exposure plays a very important role in terms of what you aspire to become. So this is like, there are so many other things that
there are a lot of things, and I just want to dive deeper into the stuff that you've said. You mentioned modeling, and I think that modeling or seeing examples, I think that's a huge thing for a lot of women. You talk about you saw male doctors, you saw a male president. I give an example of, when I was still in primary school, I remember I used to like traditional dance, and then my dad and I had a conversation, and he says, "So Tari, what are you planning on using this skill for?" And I said, Daddy, kind of president, I don't know what time better. And he says, "But sweetheart, don't you think you can be president?" And until that point that we had that conversation with my dad, I hadn't thought about it. I'm like, what are you talking about? A female president? So I think about women who perhaps are growing up in rural areas, very underprivileged, who don't even have access to television or any type of media, and who are they role modeling? The way that Zimbabwe is set up, like right now, 60% of our population is in the rural areas. And we know that the females are more than the males. So who are these women looking up to? You also mentioned Yima opportunities, and this has been a big issue, particularly in the universities, that you'll have the men, or boys rather at that point, being said you're going to be admitted into university with 15 points, medicine. But then if you're a female, you can come in with 12 points. And this nyaya yo is like, okay, nyaya makota. Should we be doing it? I'm a little bit conflicted about that one. But we'll talk about it. But I want to hear what your thoughts are on that.
So here's the thing. Our systems are not perfect. That's one thing that I have to illustrate. Like, there's a lot of things because you have to understand, sometimes you have to zoom out and look at the society structure that we inherited, the society structure that we're living in. So it's merit based. So you have to, people talk about meritocracy, but we sometimes do not realize the inequalities that come with such a system, because it doesn't take into consideration the conditions that result in some people achieving more than others.
Absolutely.
So it doesn't take into consideration all these complexities. So I think the quota system, what they were trying to do is they're trying to see how they can try to strike a balance. I'll give an example of two kids who are, let's say, for example, one, I worked in Binga district. So there's a child who's growing up in Binga, where they have to walk 10 kilometers to the nearest school, which probably does not have a science lab, which doesn't have enough resources or even teachers, because most teachers would not want, for example, to go and work there. They would rather work in Harare.
Yeah.
So that child is going to compete with myself, who has like supportive parents who make sure that I have all the books that I need. I'm going to the nearest school. I have all the teachers that I need, and I have parents who ask me, "What do you want to do?" When you grow up, I have parents who support my dream. So when we sit for an exam, the ZIMSEC exam, we're going to be marked the same. They don't care whether you are coming from an air-conditioned classroom with all the resources, or you're coming from an area without resources. So you find that child who doesn't have any books, if he gets, let's say, for example, 10 points, and I get 15 points, I think he or she is more intelligent than me, because if they could get so much in such an environment. So now when we're applying for the same post at university, they do not take into consideration that they just want 15 points, but they're not looking at all these circumstances that may show that actually this person has potential. So now when you look at the gender dynamics of it, you'd find that, because like when I mentioned earlier, you'd find that as much as, yes, this child is facing through, if it's a guy, you find that maybe women who are coming from that society face more struggles than the boy child.
Absolutely.
We talked about the issues of roles. We talked about the issues of opportunities. We talked about the issues of, my grandmother used to told me that, like when she grew up, it was common for some parents not to pay fees for the girl child.
Of course, because you're going to get married, and so why should we be doing this? Why should we be sending you to school? And it's really unfair. I hope there aren't some people who are still doing this. But I had an interesting conversation with some gentlemen a couple of weeks ago, and it was about teenagers getting pregnant, and underage children getting pregnant. And one particular gentleman, his views surprised me. Angered me almost. And he said, if she is less than 18, say she's 16 years old and she gets pregnant, what is she still doing here? At least if she gets married, I'm going to get something. And I said, but what about her dreams? What about the things that she wants to achieve? And he says, well, if I say, no, you can't go and get married, then this means this problem, this baby is going to be my problem. And frankly speaking, I don't want to do this. And I had to think, okay, so this man represents quite a number of people that we've got in our society. So what hope then do we have for a female, when she, say this, Lucy, makes a mistake, Are the people understanding? Are the people going to give her another opportunity, you know, to say, you go ahead and you're going to dream?
I think when we discuss a lot of such issues, people bring up culture. They always bring up issues of morality and everything, but we do not take time and reflect or critique some of these systems in terms of, are they applicable now? Are they fair? Are they just? We just have this group mentality. But when you stand back and you think, okay, yes, they say this is my culture, this is the expected role, so this is what happens, this is how we're supposed to react when a woman gets pregnant, or my sister gets pregnant. Do you take time to think, okay, is it the best decision for her? Yes, it's culture, it's whatever you might try to find an excuse, because that's always the easy route. But have you ever thought about is it the best interest of the person? And is the boy child who's responsible, because it takes for a person to get pregnant, it involves two people.
Two people, yeah.
So is the boy child involved receiving the same sort of punishment in cause, or rather, have you reflected on what made her vulnerable? I like doing root cause analysis where you when something happens that I always give people the benefit of the doubt. So if I see when a girl gets pregnant, we start thinking, okay, what happened? Let's do what made her vulnerable. Is it issues of access to contraception? Is it access to information and education? What put her in such a situation where she could not negotiate safe sex? Or what prompted her to be involved in sexual activities early? And I think that's very important, because when you look at the class dynamics, if you were to look at the pregnancy rates from schools, when you look at rural schools in low-income areas and schools in high-income areas and schools in private schools, you might be surprised that private schools can go for so many years without
teenage
pregnancies. But in other schools, it's something that they see regularly. Like every year, 1 or 2 girls, they drop out of school because of pregnancy. Then in rural schools, sometimes it could be worse, because I remember when I was working there, you'd see a lot of 15-year-olds coming pregnant.
Wow.
So it's not just about. So I think what I always view it as the problem being of the community and the society as a whole. I don't blame the individual only, because a lot of people, we tend to talk about the individual. She was not responsible, you know. But I try to think about, okay, as society, what resulted in that? And I think having that whole collective responsibility as a society can help us reach a point where we can start thinking about, okay, what are the best interests? Yes, she has made this mistake. This is how we take ownership of the mistake as society and say, okay, this is our mistake as a community. How can we prevent the same mistakes happening? Where did we go wrong? Maybe we say, okay, let's improve their access to maybe if she was coming from a background where she didn't have food, and maybe someone came and an older
offered her something,
took advantage of that and offered her something, then because obviously the power dynamics that happen results in her not being able to negotiate safer sex. So you start looking at, okay, she has done this, but okay, let's give her a second chance. What resources can we put in? She needs to go back to school. What support can we give her? What support are other women give her? What are there other women who have gone through that but went on to do something with their lives?
Of course.
Can they talk to her and counsel her? Because I think she needs the most support. She needs counseling in terms of, because already imagine a 15-year-old, like what's going through her mind, being pregnant. I think her world is shattering. Whatever dreams that she had, she needs the most support that we can give her at that stage.
I like how you talk about, because this is a big thing when it comes to poverty. A girl from Borrowdale, for example, she's 16. Her dad buys her a car. She goes to a fancy school. Per weekend, she probably had her headphones on, or she's going on holiday, or, weekend getaway. She can do certain things. And you mentioned another thing, access to information as well. So you find in the more affluent suburbs, the people or the children there are given adequate information. These are the trends. This is what is going on. And people are able to have these conversations on contraception, safe sex in a regular manner, so to speak. But when we move to the rural communities, to the low income communities, it's not as simple for us to talk about wear a condom. And is it at the dining room table or, when you're having your dinner, it doesn't really happen that way. Our culture also plays a part. And yet we are trying to pursue this agenda to empower women. We say women should lead, but kana poverty, it at the core, at the base of where we are, and even kana are we able to support them?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, because when you look at poverty and how it affects people, like you said earlier, it affects men differently, it affects women differently. Even amongst women, it affects women with disabilities differently.
Yeah.
It's when you look at the impact of poverty at the individual level, it's different. So I think the importance of realizing all of this is not to be in a position of being helpless or hopeless, but being in a position of trying to rethink how we can restructure our societies, what can be our priorities, be it from a government level, be it from a community level, in terms of trying to address issues with regards to poverty, because it's a mammoth task.
It is.
It is a lot, but I think we also have to be deliberate about it. So that means when such stories are told, it means that the policymakers will think about, okay, how can we invest? Which sectors should we invest in? And how can we improve in those sectors for us to try to make sure that people have opportunities that make them less vulnerable? And how can we structure in our society in such that a child who's in Borodale and a child who's in the rural part of Zimbabwe more or less have the same access to education and other things? But again, it's not as simple as that.
No,
because,
of course,
because
not.
Even when you're now talking about there's something that you mentioned when you made a comparative analysis of such families, like, oh, they're able to talk about this at the dining room table, but these ones cannot, or sometimes they're not. It also comes back to influence of what you're exposed to, culture and exposure, because you'd find that people who are in Borodale, for example, they're likely to live in a multiracial community, multicultural community. They adopt other cultures and other practices for other people. They see the good things that they see from other communities, of which, if you grow up in a lot of low income communities, they tend to be very not to be as diverse.
Of course.
It's usually the same people who think the same way as you, the same people who have the same mindsets and stereotypes as you, and the same attitudes concerning a lot of issues, be it religion and culture and all that. So at the end of the day, because of the stigma that are associated with having, like, thinking differently, sometimes people end up not just conforming to what's there. So because not everyone has been exposed to a different way of doing things, they still continue having the same issues coming up, the same challenges and the same issues coming up. So and I think it's that's why I always tell people that I think we really need more and more social scientists of our own, anthropologists and so on, because I think those are the people who can actually inform policies from a perspective that takes into dynamics all the intricate complexities that we're
experiencing. Yeah. Absolutely. Yes. So as a man, going back to poverty, affects people differently, the men and the women. And just going back to our communities, a lot of girls spend a lot of time, cleaning the house, fetching water. And now we've got this thing of unpaid housework being recognized as work because it is an actual thing. I remember I was reading some article where this woman said, she approached her husband, she had a baby, and she said she made the decision that she was going to be a stay-at-home mother. But they were not going to get a domestic helper. And after a couple of months, she went back to her husband and said, you know what, the money that you're going to, because I now think we need help, but the money that you're going to pay your domestic helper, you need to pay me. Because I am essentially taking care of this child and all of this. So they managed to strike that balance. However, we know that in our local community, that doesn't really happen. So you're the woman, you are the caretaker of the house manager, you're going to give birth to the children, and you're going to take care of everybody. That's from a woman's point of view. But then we've got the young girls as well, who are now taking care of their little brothers and sisters. You hardly ever find in our community young men who do that. wobikira vana ugoita so, it's normally how the young girl who gets to experience that. So in your own life, from interacting with other people, what did you see? Perhaps in your own home, did you have those kind of separation of duties, or was it a blanket type statement? What was going on?
Okay. So I'll start off with the issue of toys, like when you're a child. You notice that a lot of toys that young girls they buy for girls, they have to do with housework.
Yes, you've got the pots of the pans.
Yes, they've got the pots and pans and all that.
Yeah.
And when they're talking to women, from a young age, people talk about. I've heard people talking about when they're talking to a primary school girl, and they're already talking about, oh no, you need to learn to do the dishes so that you'll be a good wife.
Yeah.
So that you won't be a lazy wife. So from an early stage, they're being groomed into becoming wives. For me, from an early stage, as a man, I didn't experience that. It was always, I used to think, I was ambitious. I could dream of whatever I wanted to.
What did they tell you?
Well, I could, to be honest, I was never, maybe if there was at any point, I don't remember being told, early, like in the early stages of my life, of what the expectations of me when I get married in any way. It started coming on later on that, okay, well, if you're going to be a father, you have to offer security. And so I think there was space for me to dream. But I guess at the same time, my parents were generally very supportive. So I guess that makes it a bit different, because you'd find that even when it came to gender roles, we all had to do the same, because we only have one sister.
Okay.
So we had to do the dishes. Everyone, you had to clean the house, everyone. And when we got a helper, one of the things that my parents said was, look, she's just coming to help us because we are overwhelmed at the moment.
Right.
But here's the thing: you still have to clean your own room. You still have to learn how to wash your own clothes and all. And my mom used to laugh and say, okay, as a bachelor, I want you to be able to cook for yourself or something like that. So I guess, yes.
Yeah, I'll tell you, from a woman's point of view, it's very different growing up in Africa. The reason why we had to fetch water is because everybody here needs to have water. The reason why you need to learn to cook is so that one day when you get married, you need to be able to cook for your husband and your children, and you need to, look nice so that usazonyadzisa your family. But hardly ever from the point of view you're cooking because you need to eat. Or you need to eat healthy, or you need to, clean your space because you want to grow up or live in a clean environment. So as women, being groomed to anticipate that something is going to happen, he is going to do A, B, C, and D for me. And that's a little bit problematic. And I wonder what it will take for us to get that mentality out of our heads, because I have seen quite a number of women, and I always talk about this, that some of them are slaying, right? But at the surface level, it seems they're slaying, but they're really troubled. They're poor, and they find themselves now engaging in perhaps sexual activity, in relationships, so that I can eat that chicken, I can have that weave, I can have things in my life, but not necessarily you as a woman, you're able to do this.
Yes, I think I have to acknowledge that. I think what I'm going to say may sound. I have to also acknowledge that I'll not like fully empathize or with the experience of a woman, because I'm a man.
Okay.
So, but from my perspective as an external view, one of the things that I think has a contribution to that is the objectification of women. So when you look at the roles that women play in society, from our conversations as men, from everywhere, you'd find one of the key things about women, it's about their beauty, it's about how their beauty, it's about their sexuality and all. So a beautiful woman is told from early on that her beauty is an asset.
Of course.
And because of the emphasis that we talked about, where we're trying to groom women to serve husbands, even when you look at the professional roles, most women would be groomed to be secretaries, would be groomed to be like those roles where you are serving like a man, who's a
man
master, in charge. So because of that, now what happens is a lot of women grow up internalizing that, and their bodies are sexualized at an early stage, at puberty and all that. So for them, it also becomes an asset they look at it as an asset that can bring them some of the things that they want, and they take advantage of that. And what worsens that is also the structural issues that are in our society. Because at the same time, I don't want to get into the narrative that women get into sex work because they are lazy. I think it's way more complicated than that. Because now we have to also acknowledge the structural issues that result in those women not getting as the same opportunities as myself. That then, so one, they don't get the same opportunities as me. And when they're in their desperate situation, they've been groomed to be told that, okay, your body you're beautiful, you can get so much. And there are men who have been groomed to take care of women. Like, for example, one of the things that we talk about is always want to take care. You want always to spoil a woman. You always want to do that. So we take advantage of that. So we use our resources, the financial resources that we have gained over time.
So you have had the opportunities. You have taken advantage of them. You're now in a position to be financially sound and strong.
Yes.
And now you're using that to take advantage of this one who didn't have as many opportunities as you.
Yes.
Wow.
So now I'm paying her the expensive phone that she wants. I'm doing all these things. I'm giving her the lifestyle that she wants. And for her, because she's in a society where it's quite normal, where, like, for example, when you talk about dating, how many times do we actually talk about women that they have to be responsible for their own bill when they go dating?
Why?
It's always about, I want to look for a rich man
Guy
who will take care of me.
Yes.
And when women are talking about their relationships, they do that. Oh, he didn't buy me this and that. That's the things that they compare. So she's in that environment where she sees you as a resource, and at the same time you are like, it rubs on my ego. Like, you're happy to be able to say
to look up to you, and he's
like,
able to do this for me.
Because when I'm talking to the other guys and say, you know what, look at this chick, she's beautiful and all that. I'm having an affair with her and all that. I'm like, it rubs onto like my ego. It boosts my ego and my confidence.
So what if that situation boosts your ego, rubs your confidence, and makes you feel great? What does dating a woman who can do things for herself do then? Because she's not looking to you to pay the bill, to buy her the phone, or take her out. She can do things by herself, but she still wants to be with you.
It's intimidating. It's intimidating for a lot of us, because I think we've always this conversation, because people talk about independent women struggling to get into relationships, but the issue it's something that's in unfamiliar
territory. Yeah,
it's unfamiliar territory. I will use, like, for example, you'd find that probably in the first early days of independence, for example, you'd find that maybe a lot of white people are uncomfortable seeing black people in spaces that they were used to, because they're like, okay, wow, it's intimidating, because they're not used to that, because they're growing up in a normal way, those were white dominated. So the same now, where you grow up in a certain social structure that you're used to, then something new and different comes in. You feel intimidated. So one thing that would happen is some people feel threatened. They feel like, oh, but now what does it mean? Does it mean that I'll not be able? The power dynamics are now leveled, because you're now losing some of the power and the control that you had. So you're now realizing that, okay, now it's not, your money is no longer meaning anything, because one, she's now able to negotiate safe sex if she wants to, or she's able to say no, because here's the thing, she doesn't feel obliged to, because because some people, I always maintain that when there are financial imbalances, some women end up doing certain things because they feel obliged, they feel like that's the thing they're contributing to the relationship.
Yes.
Like with her now, because she's paying her bills, she doesn't really depend on you. A lot of people feel intimidated about it. Though you'd find that a lot more now who've been exposed to that for quite a while, they actually find that it's actually liberating. But with every unfamiliar situation, the first reaction is to feel threatened.
So what do we do about poverty affecting women? Because now we see it's not just about you going to fetch water. It's not just about you, experiencing period poverty. It's, to me, how I view this, poverty, success, opportunity are directly linked to time, which is a valuable resource. So now you're going to spend 24 hours maybe out of, your 6 months cleaning the house, fetching water, doing all of this. Whereas that time could have, something else could have been done. So you as a man, you've got this extra time. It seems like it's extra time to pursue your goals and do whatever it is that you want. For the people who are of the mindset that, women there's no point in investing in her because she's just going to get married anyway. How do we change that mindset?
I think a starting point is having these conversations, like to unpack, because I feel like when a lot of conversations are shallow, we don't really get into dwell deep into some of the complicated aspects and the many aspects of it. So I think a good starting point is having conversations, because there is something about the power of stories. Because when a story is told, it's relatable. It's not something that you see in a book. And when that happens now, when you're seeing the impact, like I from listening to, I remember this incident for me that made me more interested and actually made me reflect on my privilege as a male. I was at a workshop for young women in politics early on at university. I went as an ally, and this woman went in funny. She's like, what, when I stand to say my speech, one of the key things that I look at is how I'm dressed. I look, am I dressed decent enough?
Of course.
Will people listen to me because I'm an intelligent woman, or people will objectify me? They'll think, oh, she's beautiful, or she's... So she's like, then I started thinking, okay, well, when I stand in front of people, I don't think about that. I don't really care about where...
No, you're just going there.
I'm just going there. I don't care about people are going to objectify me sexually and all that. You start looking at those things. But I wasn't aware of that narrative before. But getting to know that narrative, I think creating spaces where those conversations can be had, I think it's a good starting point in terms of changing, like trying to change mindsets if possible. Then the issue of people who have the power and the privilege. So here's the thing. I think, like as a male, because I have benefited from male privilege, I think the male counterparts are likely to listen to me more than other females, because if a woman comes to say, oh, she's angry, she's frustrated and what, like, those stereotypes that a lot of feminists have.
Yeah.
But when you start talking about, what, guys, here's the thing, these are our experiences, but have you ever really thought about this and that, and use examples of be it your daughters or sisters, like, no, but look at it, yes, it's unfair, but don't you think we had advantages here and there? And then even with the women the women with power and privilege, they can also try to use their own power and privilege to start those conversations with other women to inspire. So we talked about the issue of visibility. I think one of the most important thing is if we have more and more powerful, successful young women going to inspire that rural young girl that, what, look at me. This is my story. This is my struggle. My struggles may not be the same as yours. I may not be aware of your struggle, but look at me where now I've achieved this. She'll be inspired. She'll be inspired. She'll be like, what? I met this woman who is doing this much, and she's probably maybe the first woman that she has seen, because probably most of the women that are seeing are her mothers, her grandmothers, are women who are in the community, her aunts,
Yeah.
But she's saying this. I think already that opens up her world.
It does, and I agree with you that it does open up her world, but we also have this problem, I suppose, of when people now become successful, they seem to forget where they have come from. So now, because you're successful, oh my gosh, I don't really have time to go and inspire somebody else, or we also are blinded by our privilege. We forget, we seem to think that I got here because of me, and yet we forget that there were other people who also invested in me. I had access to the television, so I could see certain things. I could aspire to doing this. So what do you suppose it'll take for us to realize, acknowledge the privilege that we have, and honestly decide, what, I'm going to be intentional about actually making a difference in somebody else's life?
Yes. I don't think there's a clear-cut answer to that in terms of recommendations to say, okay, we should do this and that. But I think from my own personal experiences, one of the things that has helped me a lot in terms of reflecting on my privilege is putting myself, I guess, in my work puts me in a lot of those situations where you are working with people who are from underprivileged backgrounds, going into rural communities. So you get to listen to their story, you get to hear their stories, and during that you get to reflect on your own life and say, okay, wow, yes, I was hardworking, but the fact that I had two supportive parents growing up already, that put me at an advantage over others. And a lot of people, when we have conversations about privileges, they think that we are trying to say, feel guilty about your privilege. No, it's not about you feeling guilty, but it's about you now realizing the power that you have, realizing the influence that you have, and also realizing that when you are in a position of influence because of what your privilege facilitated you, think about other people who haven't been in the circumstances that you we didn't have the advantages that you had when you're growing up. And I always say, like I was talking to with a couple of friends, I was like, you know what, here's the thing. One of the things that we have to try to introduce, be it in schools or whatever in our communities, to make people realize that Zimbabwe is at a stage where we are still building our country. We're still building our communities. We're at a stage where we are still trying to envision what we want to be.
Yeah.
We haven't reached that to that level of society. So that means that in whatever, like if you were to, we always talk about what you want to be when you grow up. That's like one of the questions that we should ask people is, like, how do you want to contribute to the society when you grow up? Let's have that mindset where in your pursuit for individual success, you also start thinking about collective success. Like, what does it mean for my rural communities where I'm coming from? How can I be that change? How can we be to a point where 30 years down the line, we don't want to continue having the same problems? So that means that I'm not taking an active role in terms of the development, because you're now saying, okay, in my field, my expertise and my area of interest, how can I be a resource? So I think that's very, very important when you now start having that mindset, because it shows you like you start having an obligation to be like, yes, you're now staying in your beautiful house there, you now have your kids, you're sending your kids to a good school, life is comfortable to some extent. Yes, you have so many pressures that you want, but I think at the back of your mind, if you've been groomed in such a way of how can I contribute to the community, you start thinking about bigger picture. So you know what, yes, our country, I now have these skills. I now want to use these skills to ensure that my grandchildren have a brighter future, to ensure the next generations will have a brighter future. So I think, I don't know how best we can promote that mindset where you have to think about, we have to be active in building the community that we want. I don't know how best we can build it, but I think that's very important.
I like that. Instead of asking what you want to be when you grow up, ask alongside, how are you going to contribute to the society? But even that question, what do you want to be when you grow up? I mean, Google estimates that in 2025, or rather by 2025, we're going to need a whole new set of skills. Some of these professions are going to be outdated. And here we are in Zimbabwe. We've got, some child who doesn't have access to an internet, to the internet, no phone, absolutely nothing going on. And actually we end up through traditional school. Worse, she's a woman. And then come 2025, maybe my skills are who you are now are digital skills, which you just don't have. And that's really unfortunate. So I have to then wonder, can a woman afford to dream, especially in this country? Can you afford to say, one day I would like to be president, one day I want to own my own company, and I want to be, a leader of a political party? Do I have the time to dream? Is my community supportive of this?
I think I'm tempted to say yes.
Okay,
but
that's a good start.
Yes, but at the same time, I'm also reflecting on what I've been exposed to as an individual. Well, I can easily say yes because I was afforded that privilege to dream. So it's that. So for me, yes is a straightforward answer.
Yeah,
but it's not the reality of a lot of women, because I'm thinking there's a 14-year-old who is along the railway tracks there right now, like as we speak, waiting for the next client.
Yeah,
Can she dream beyond her next meal? I think one of the things that probably can facilitate for our women, for a lot of people to start dreaming, is if we try to address some of the basic things. And that's so many levels. So I think we're looking at, like at policy level or at development level and all those things. If we address the basic things to ensure that no child goes to sleep hungry, I think they can start thinking about other things, because their basic things are met. I dreamt because
you were full.
I had full, yeah.
Yeah. So we've got, so whilst the government can do certain things, but what about in the home. Because I am a firm believer in, there's a reason why we've got the males and the females. We need to coexist. We can't say we're going to exist in a world where there are only females or world where there are only males. Because we know kuti males have, particularly fathers, have a strong influence or impact, their availability, presence or absence on their daughters' lives. So now poverty, and this little girl is hungry. And can Baba really have a conversation with his daughter and say, I don't want you sleeping, laying on the railway tracks, because, this is not good for you. But just to have these conversations where the father is able to empower his daughter and say, well, I guess you can be whatever it is that you need to be. And then I am also here to support you.
Yes, I think it takes some bit of unlearning in gender roles in terms of their expectations. So I think I'll put that responsibility more to our current generation and less to our parents' generation or older generation, because of the dynamics. I have to acknowledge the reality on the ground. But I have a friend who really inspires me. He's not Zimbabwean though. He's Asian, and he always tells me, like, whenever he visits his nieces, he tells them you can be whoever you want. Like, he takes that opportunity to inspire them. Like, sometimes here and there when I see powerful, interesting women online, I send them to my little sisters, my cousins, and I know that I'm trying to play my role. So I think the expectation, if it's brothers, sometimes the father may not be able to fulfill that role. Sometimes the father may be absent. But if our generation as men, we start encouraging each other, and in terms of amongst ourselves, to start telling our sisters to dream. So it can start with your own sister, it's your own daughter. And so that means that's a challenge, like, to every father who's listening here, to every brother who's listening here, like, having that, like, starting telling your daughter, okay, you can be whoever you want. You can achieve your dream. It goes a long way, like starting in-house, because no one is going to say that to them outside of the household.
Yeah.
So I agree. Like, it starts within the household. It doesn't have to be a father. It could be a brother. Sometimes it could even be a neighbor. But I think when you have that understanding and the knowledge, it comes back to the issues of privilege, because having information is a privilege in itself.
Absolutely.
Then you use that in terms of positive change, be it in church, in communities. So let's look at the community structures that we have and view them as resources that we have to empower young women, so that for those who may not have that father figure in their household, at least they know that in that church they're getting that message. In whatever societies that we have in that community, they're getting that messages. But we have to be deliberate about it. And we have to be deliberate, and we have to and for us to be deliberate, it starts with these conversations and then taking them to our communities, so that when you're drinking with your buddies, start thinking like, but you know what, guys, I think let's do something in our community, a sports day or something targeted at the young girls in our community, and let's see what information, what we can impact for them, like, as a community. I think when we start doing that,
things
can go
will
a long
change.
way. Yes, we just have to think outside the box.
Dr. T, I've got to thank you. My greatest takeaway from this one is, how can I contribute to my world? How can I do that? And I think we've done well by having this conversation. Hopefully it also opens up more conversations in our community. Thank you. That's it, guys, for this episode of Our Women Leading, a podcast for women by women, proudly brought to you by Gender and Media Connect, Research and Advocacy Unit, Women's Coalition of Zimbabwe, as well as the Embassy of Sweden in Harare, where we're tackling the topic, women, poverty, education, and leadership. Until next time, have a good day.